The United States of America and Iran may reach a deal to finally open the Strait of Hormuz as early as today or tomorrow. This was emphatically stated by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Literally right after that, the New York Times reported that Iran and Oman are close to a separate agreement to resume shipping through the same Strait of Hormuz. However, the Iranian side officially denies that there are any negotiations with Washington. But Trump insists that yesterday he did in fact speak with the Iranians. Meanwhile, the oil market managed to crash by 7% in the last 24 hours and almost completely recover that drop. And all of this happened in just one day. And this raises questions. Will the Hormuz Strait be opened, and if so, under what agreement? Between the US and Iran, or between Iran and Oman? Because it's just a complete mess at this point. Let's go through all the versions of what's happening, because each side has its own story here, and they directly contradict each other, although there does still seem to be some progress. My name is Pechiy. Let's try to understand this Middle Eastern issue. But before we begin, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, like this episode, and leave any comment at all. So, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, literally just the other day said, and I quote, "Last week we saw Donald Trump threaten Iran with the largest military campaign since World War II. And now, because of this, we are negotiating with Iran. I think there is a chance that today or tomorrow we will make a deal to open the Hormuz Strait." So, according to the American administration, it was precisely the tough threat of military escalation and the destruction of the energy sector that forced Tehran to come to the negotiating table. Donald Trump himself, just the day before, on the evening of August 3rd, publicly announced the specific date for the opening of the Hormuz Strait. Here is his quote. "We are talking about opening the strait as early as tomorrow." Note, a full reopening? Well, it's been almost a day since that statement was made. According to Trump, this was supposed to be the first phase of negotiations, after which the parties would move on to discussing Iran's nuclear program. And separately, Trump emphasized a point that is fundamental for him. The US will not allow Iran to charge fees for ships passing through the strait. And he added that if anyone should profit from this, it should be Americans, not Iranians, because according to Trump, the situation is completely 100% controlled by the United States of America, and all of Iran's statements about controlling the Hormuz Strait are all lies. Moreover, blatant lies. At the same time, the New York Times reports that Iran and Oman, let me emphasize, without the participation of the United States of America, are close to a separate agreement specifically on the resumption of shipping in the Hormuz Strait. But, as the publication emphasizes, the implementation of this agreement could effectively cement Tehran's control over one of the world's most important maritime routes, rather than open it as a neutral international route. That is, while Donald Trump is conducting his own negotiations there, Iran and Oman are establishing their own rules in the Strait of Hormuz. Let's take a look at the proposed terms of this agreement between Iran and Oman. According to sources from the New York Times, ships heading to the Persian Gulf will pass strictly through a channel controlled by Iran and located along its own coast. But ships leaving the Persian Gulf will use a different route, this time along the coast of Oman. So, in other words, the strait is essentially divided into two corridors with different jurisdictions. Iran controls the entrance to the Persian Gulf, and Oman controls the exit. At the same time, Iranian officials claim that no official duties will be charged. Instead, a so-called service fee is being introduced, which is supposed to cover environmental expenses, the security of cargo ships and tankers, as well as personnel costs. According to two Iranian officials, the funds received will be equally distributed between Iran and Oman. Well, this is just some kind of joke because, well, Iran, which attacks tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, will be charging money to provide security in that very same Strait of Hormuz. Well, let's put it this way. If Iran didn't attack the tankers, then, well, everything would be safe anyway. On the other hand, let me remind you that the strait was completely open, no fees, nothing. There was nothing like that until Donald Trump decided to start a war against Iran in February of this year. And here we have a direct contradiction between the two versions. An American official, who is also quoted by the New York Times, stated that the Iranian version of the agreement is not true. According to him, any temporary routes through the strait will not require agreement with Tehran, obtaining permits from Iran, or any kind of fees. That is, Washington and Tehran describe what is presumably the same agreement in completely different ways. The Iranians talk about their control and a service fee. The Americans say that there will be no Iranian control or fees at all. Meanwhile, Trump says they're already close to a deal. Now, the most unexpected thing. The Iranian side basically denies the existence of any deal specifically with the Americans. The Tasnim agency claims that the Iranian authorities rejected the American proposal, which contains demands for the immediate opening of the Hormuz Strait. Tehran continues to insist on its own terms. Moreover, the Iranian Fars agency directly denied the report that Iran had already agreed to the plan to open the strait. They say they did not agree. At the same time, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghai stated that there are no negotiations with the US at all and no meetings are planned. At the same time, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi said, as early as last week, quote, "The Hormuz Strait will never return to its pre-war state, so even if some kind of agreement is reached." Iranian diplomacy itself is already ruling out a return to the status that existed before the conflict began on February 28, 2015, in order to... Okay, while the US and Iran are arguing over the wording, what is actually happening physically in the Hormuz Strait itself? In the past 24 hours, only 3 tankers and 3 bulk carriers have passed through the Hormuz Strait. That's a drop in the ocean compared to the pre-war traffic. The fate of another route, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea and the detour around the south of Africa, is also telling. The day before, 6 supertankers flying the flag of Saudi Arabia in the Gulf of Aden set course around South Africa. Well, that is, they preferred not to take any risks at all, while only 2 vessels carrying Saudi oil still passed through the Bab el-Mandeb, and even then with their transponders turned off. This shows that even while there are talks about opening the Strait of Hormuz, the rest of the regional logistics remain extremely uncertain, because it turns out that the Houthi blockade by the Houthis in the Red Sea is still in effect. And literally today, August 4th, another alarm sounded in the Strait of Hormuz. A cargo ship reported an attack. So, while Trump insists that the strait is under his full control, Iran continues its attacks on those ships that try to bypass its control. The reaction of the oil market is quite telling. It's in turmoil. The day before, on Monday, oil prices plummeted sharply. Brent lost about 7%, dropping to its lowest levels in almost a week. The drop happened after Donald Trump announced that he was holding off on new strikes against Iran until negotiations about ending the war. The market saw this as a sign of de-escalation, and prices went down. But then, on the same day, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Baghai denied the very fact of negotiations, stating that no meetings were planned. And then, on Tuesday morning, oil regained part of that drop, and Brent rose by 1.5 and continues to grow. And a separate and very telling aspect of today is the growing criticism within the United States itself towards the negotiators with Iran who are supposed to be bringing this deal to the finish line. Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, a veteran who has opposed the Trump administration's policy on Iran since the beginning of the war, once again publicly criticized Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, who have been leading the negotiations with Iran for several months now. Here is his quote. "I would advise Trump that the solution is not to keep doing what he has been doing so far. Don't put his realtor friend and son-in-law in charge of the negotiations. Trump should put people in charge who know how to do this. People who know how to talk to the Iranians and build a coalition, to bring our allies back together." Well, more bluntly, the same thing was said earlier by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal, who stated that Witkoff and Kushner, quote, "seem biased when it comes to Ukraine and look more like they're on Russia's side than impartial mediators." Although this was said in relation to the Ukrainian negotiation track, the complaint itself is exactly the same. That is, two people without diplomatic experience who came from the real estate development business are conducting several of the most important negotiation tracks at the same time. On Iran, on Ukraine, and previously they participated in negotiations over the Gaza Strip. But it seems that Trump is not going to give up on his negotiators. So, we have at least 3 mutually exclusive versions of the same thing on our hands. Washington's version goes like this: a deal on the Hormuz Strait is possible today or tomorrow, and the strait will be opened without any Iranian fees. According to the Iranian side, there is no negotiation with the US at all. The New York Times version, citing sources involved in the negotiations, goes like this: the agreement is almost ready, but it actually reinforces, rather than cancels, Iranian control over part of the Hormuz Strait. That is, even if a formal agreement is announced, the actual maritime traffic, 3 tankers and 3 bulk carriers per day, shows that the actual easing of shipping disruptions is happening much more slowly than any political statements suggest. Plus, the attack on a vessel in the Hormuz Strait today, on the very day that Trump and Bessent claimed the strait would be reopened, well, in itself calls into question the realism of the deadline promised by Trump. What happens next? Let's look at possible scenarios. The first scenario: the parties actually announce some form of partial reopening of the strait in the coming days, but the details of control and fees will remain a subject of dispute for a long time, as described by the scheme with separate corridors for incoming and outgoing vessels. That is, they may partially open the strait, but the conditions will continue to be discussed. The second scenario: negotiations will break down again, as they have several times this year, causing another surge in oil market volatility. And the third scenario: if diplomacy completely fails, Trump may return to the threat of military escalation, which Treasury Secretary Bessent called the reason for Iran's current willingness to at least talk. Well, for now, all we can do is watch as Trump keeps assuring everyone of a victory that doesn't really exist. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.